Arkadaşlar hoş geldiniz. Zaten Akademi Masası bu hafta 5. kez düzenliyoruz ama aramızda ilk defa katılmış olanlar var. Hemen ben kısaca tekrardan anlatayım. Akademi Masası, Politik, Düşünce Kulübü'nün bu sene oluşturmuş olduğu bir konsept. Her hafta Bilkent University bünyesindeki akademisyen hocalarımızı buraya davet ediyoruz ve onların moderatörlüğünde uluslararası ilişkiler konseptinde ele alabileceğimiz temel konuları burada tartışmaya çalışıyoruz. Kotamız sınırlı, malum zaten yuvarlak masa toplantısı olduğu için görüyorsunuz biraz sınırlı bir kotamız var. O yüzden başvuru yapmayı unutmayın. Aynı zamanda bu dönemin son etkinliği oluyor bu. Önümüzdeki dönem başı itibariyle tekrardan etkinliklerimize devam edeceğiz. Kısa bir ara veriyoruz. İkinci dönem başı itibariyle tekrardan bizim resmi hesaplarımızda bütün etkinlikleri takip edebilirsiniz. Hocamıza bugün aramıza katıldığı için ben sizler adına da çok teşekkür ediyorum. Ve tekrardan sözü size bırakayım. İyi bir toplantı diliyorum herkese.
Merhaba, iyi akşamlar. Gecenin, akşamın bu saatinde diyeyim. Sizi çok yormadan 20 dakika içerisinde, bu da bayağı iddialı bir maraton. 20 dakika içerisinde Türk-Rus ilişkilerinin genel boyutlarıyla incelemeye çalışacağız ama esas anladığım kadarıyla üzerine durmak istedikleriniz bu son dönem yaşanan olaylar. Genelde de zaten uluslararası siyaset sahnesinde dostluklardan çok düşmanlıklar ortaya çıktığında konu biraz alevleniyor veya işte uzmanlara ihtiyaç duyulur falan. Geçen sene böyle bir seri bu konuya paralel konuşmalar vermiştim. Bu 2014 yılının tam Aralık ayı. Tam bir yıl önce Putin ve Erdoğan'ın İstanbul'da buluşup ortak basın açıklaması yaptıkları bir dönemde, hatta yanılmıyorsam 4 Aralık mıydı, 3 Aralık mıydı? Aynı gündü. Yani ben Türk-Rus ilişkilerinin dünden bugüne veya benzer başlıklı bir konuşma yaparken Putin ve Erdoğan da onları değerlendiriyordu. Bir takım talihsiz izleyiciler benim konuşmama geldiler esas hikayeyi kaçırıp. Ama tabii durum çok farklıydı yani geçen sene. Bu Türk-Rus ilişkilerinin aslında çok genel perspektifte son 500 yıllık tarihine baktığınızda veya işte II. Mehmet'in Kafe limanını işte Karadeniz'de ele geçirip Türklerle Rusların komşu olmaya başladığı dönemden itibaren baktığınızda çok net göreceksiniz ki Türkler ve Ruslar arasında dostluk sürelerinden çok düşmanlık dönemleri hakim. Sadece 19. yüzyılda 4, hatta 4,5 da diyebilirsiniz kere savaşıldı. Savaş barışa nazaran ikili ilişkileri daha fazla şekillendirdi. Genel boyutlarıyla bakıldığında. Bunun tabii toplumların, yani Türk toplumundaki toplumsal hafızasına olan etkileri de çok derindi. Yani hangi dönem bir grup örnek insanı ele alıp işte bir araştırma yapsanız Ruslarla ilgili bu son zamana kadar çok pozitif düşünceler hakim değildi. Onu görürsünüz. Özellikle Soğuk Savaş döneminde. Çok enteresan. Biz bu kadar 400 yıllık ilişkiyi işleyecek kadar vaktimiz yok burada ama en azından modern Türkiye Cumhuriyeti ile işte Sovyetler Birliği'nin ilişkilerinden itibaren ele alacak olursak, yani Birinci Dünya Harbi'nden, Büyük Harp'ten bugüne kadar son 100 yıldır iki devletin geçtiği dönem ve bu dönemdeki patternlara bakacak olursak bu iki dönem çok enteresan. Dostlukların hakim olduğu dönemler. Bence ilk başta işin diplomasi kısmına da vurgu yapmak amacıyla bu konuda bir 5 dakika falan konuşsak iyi olur. Çünkü sizin sandığınızın da ötesinde ya da genel olarak kabul edilen ikili ilişkiler veya uluslararası ilişkiler boyutunun da ötesinde Türkiye Cumhuriyeti'nin temelleriyle de çok yakından ilgili olan bir konu bu. Türk-Rus ilişkileri, Türk-Sovyet ilişkileri. Çünkü Türkiye Cumhuriyeti'nin biliyorsunuz Kurtuluş Savaşı'nın yapıldığı dönemde en sıkışık olunduğu işte Sakarya Muharebesi falan filan. Bu sırada Lenin'in gönderdiği silah ve gıda yardımı olmadan Kurtuluş Savaşı'nın kazanılması güç olabilirdi. Böyle bir counterfactual şeklinde gitmek istemiyorum ama çok enteresan bir dönem başlıyor. 400 yıllık savaşlar, muharebelerden sonra çok güzel bir dostluk süreciyle başlıyor. Türkiye Cumhuriyeti'nin hem kendi tarihi hem de diplomatik tarihi. Yani hem iç siyasal gelişmeleri açısından hem diplomatik gelişmeler açısından bakacak olursak Türk-Sovyet ilişkileri çok enteresan bir başlangıç yapmış oluyor. Bu konuyla ilgili çok fazla insanlar bu konuyu çok fazla bilmiyorlar çünkü Soğuk Savaş tarihçiliği, uluslararası ilişkiler biliminin geliştiği dönemdeki Soğuk Savaş tarihçiliği meseleye hakim olduğu için ve Soğuk Savaş'ta Türkiye ile Sovyetler Birliği farklı uçlarda bu en azından ideolojik platformun farklı uçlarında yer aldıkları için farklı kamplarında tarihçilik de tabii bu döneme çok vurgu yapmaktan kaçınmış durumda. Hatta çok enteresan Türk-Sovyet ilişkilerinin 1921 ile 1936 yılları arasındaki bu 15 yıllık dostluk süreci diyelim, hatta 39'a kadar uzatabilirsiniz. 18 yıllık dostluk süreci çok enteresan detaylarla, birçok bilinmeyen detaylarla dolu. Bu yüzden konuşmaya böyle başlamak istiyorum. Türk-Sovyet dostluğunu burada çok detaylı şekilde inceleyecek vaktimiz yok ama birkaç örnek vererek başlayayım. Mesela belki çok Türkçe bilmeyen bir katılımcımız geldi an itibariyle. Alright, this means I'll switch to English. Alright. No, it's fine. Don't leave. I'm sure the rest of the people can follow the conversation. So we've been talking about Russia and Turkey since time immemorable for the past millennia in 20 minutes. Well, 15 rather. Anyway, we were saying right before you stepped in, we began with the Soviet-Turkish friendship period, which is full of interesting details. And I can't give you all the examples or details, but I can give you a few trivia, which you might find very interesting. You go to the liveliest square at the heart of Istanbul. You will find the Taksim Square, right? It's vivacious, very colorful, vibrant, always. And at the heart of the Taksim Square is a monument. You probably know the monument. It's called the Cumhuriyet, the Republic Monument. Very few of the, let alone the tourists, but very few of Istanbul's very own locals realize that at the heart of Istanbul, amongst the very few statues that were erected during this period, the very formative period of the Turkish Republic, stands two men right behind Atatürk and İnönü and Fevzi Pasha. These two men were Voroshilov and Mikhail Frunze. So this is full of symbolism. Every revolutionary organization or every revolutionary spends little time, wastes little time in reorganization, political reorganization, but also in construction projects that represents their new organizations. Well, the German word would be Weltanschauung, the worldview of the revolutionaries. They build new stuff. I mean, it's not specific to Turkey. They build new institutions, but also new buildings and monuments that represents their new worldview. In this sense, early Kemalist Turkey, one of the first choices of building at one of the most liveliest squares in Turkey, this monument that has Mikhail Frunze and Kliment Voroshilov, is full of symbolism. It means it's a gratitude, it's a token of gratitude to thank the people, the very people who helped in Turkey at their one of the most difficult times in their history, in the formative period. If you want further evidence, this is very interesting. If you want further evidence, you can maybe Google or YouTube the movie Ankara, Heart of Turkey. Ankara, Serce Turci, is a movie commissioned by very own Mustafa Kemal Atatürk for Soviet cinematographers to portray the accomplishments of the young republic. And this movie is, again, full of symbolism. It was commissioned in 1933 and it was aired in 1934. And the footage takes place at the 10th anniversary of the Republic. And it shows to the entire world what the Turks, the new Turks, the successors of the Ottoman Empire, were able to accomplish. And seen from the eyes of Soviet cinematographers, which was one of the world's most prominent cinematographers at the time, was also filled with symbolism. I want to cut this bit very short, but here's one thing to bear in mind. I started my speech by telling you that very few people are aware of this very formative period of the Turkish Republic and its relations with the Soviet Union thereof, because of the Cold War animosity and enmity and problems between the Soviet Union and Turkey. Here's something to bear in mind. This very movie that the Turk commissioned was banned in Turkey because it was, and it was in the dusty shelves of the Republican archives, the presidential archives, which the former President Abdullah Gül graciously retreated in some documentaries. Some cinematographers actually discovered the movie, and they re-aired it. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it must be 2008 or 2009. The movie was rediscovered, and it was something of a revelation for Turkey's new administration that looks back 70 years back, to be honest, and look at how the formative period of the Turkish Republic was shaped. And this was also a timely coincidence, because the period from the end of the Cold War, when the Turkish-Soviet animosity ended, until about 2014, about a year, until about 2015 actually, the downing of the Russian jet. This was filled with animosity, the Cold War animosities, etc. This period until the downing of the Russian jet, beginning with the end of the Cold War, is also a similar period, almost a similar period with the formative period of the Turkish Republic. In other words, after a long period of enmity and hostilities and competition and rivalry, Turks and Russians once again found themselves in a transformed state of affairs, to the better, very beneficial affairs. And this brings to mind, I think, an important factor that you should bear in mind. Whenever the Turks and Russians find themselves in good neighborly relations, in friendly relations, they only benefit from this. All right, you should keep this in mind. I mean, looking at the broader pattern of things, whenever Turks and Russians, contrarily, find themselves in bad neighborly relations or problematic relations, what might be properly called the Western powers benefit from that. So it's not. I don't usually like generalizing things, but to be, I mean, one has to be quite straightforward here. Turks and Russians, whenever they actually found themselves in lucrative trade partnerships, etc., generally speaking, derive great benefits out of this. And looking at the relations, particularly after 2000, the turn of the century, the new millennium, about 2000, 2002, until about 2015, the downing of the Russian jet, Turks and Russians were able to improve their trade relationships. They basically jacked it up until up to about $33 billion per annum, and that's last year's data. You can find this on the website very easily. Turkish governmental websites or Russian governmental websites. There's a great deal of energy partnerships going on. There used to be, at least. Turkey was, as you all know, lacks certain natural resources, and therefore finds itself with the only option on the table of being the commissioner of this natural gas to Europe. And as Russia's relations became tense after the Crimean ordeal in 2013, 2014, it was Putin himself who announced last year, in December, that the Turkish Stream would be launched. The Turkish Stream project would was going to bring many benefits, obviously, for both parties. Remember, it was the Bulgarians who canceled the deal about transferring Russian natural gas to Europe, and once that happened, Turkey only was too willing to accept this new position of selling or transferring Russian gas. Turkey is an aspiring hub. Turkey wants to be the hub because it lacks it can't produce. It lacks the natural resources and can't produce this. It can easily be a hub, and so this was all fine. Now, I've been hearing comments on various TV channels and reading newspaper articles about this very recent incident. Since we don't have that much time, I should rush to it. I mean, there are lots of things to talk about Turkey and Russia in the past 100 years, etc. But we find ourselves at this very conjuncture, critical conjuncture. You, me, everyone in Turkey and Russia find themselves in this very critical conjuncture when relations once again abruptly and almost overnight became tense. Now all these positive things that we've been discussing, the trade relationships, the natural gas, the number of Russian tourists, which reached almost 4 million per year, are basically jeopardized. Now it's going to be a difficult period for both countries, but particularly for Turkey, having tense relationships. Now, an overarching argument, which I already gave you, would be, at this point, to de-escalate the crisis, which unfortunately seems very, very difficult. There are a number of explanations on the table now. I'm sure you're all more interested in hearing about the historical details. Rather than historical details, you're more interested in hearing about the recent crisis and the origins of the crisis, etc. It's a bit too early to call what the actual problem was, because we need access to, obviously, state archives, which we lack, so we can only base our arguments on basically speculation and official statements, which doesn't necessarily represent 100% truth. All right? But looking at those, we can say with certainty that the number of Russian tourists will decline. Turkey's natural gas commissioner ideals would seem very quixotic, already seems quite quixotic. And the Turkish trade volume, 33 billion, which was announced last year in that joint press statement with Erdogan and Putin, Presidents Erdogan and Putin, that they wanted to increase this figure to 100 billion. Do you remember that? 2023 is a project that the current Turkish administration gives high emphasis. And by 2023, I clearly remember President Erdogan saying we want the trade volume to reach 100 billion, which would have obviously been a fantastic thing to do. However, he stated, and for good reason, this trade relationship is also kind of problematic. Looking at the last 10 years, it's more favorably disposed to Russia rather than Turkey. If you want, one has to be more specific about this. 27 billion goes to Russia, and only about 6 billion comes to Turkey, because we're selling tomatoes in return for natural gas. I'm exaggerating. It does assume the Russians are selling a far more important and more expensive item in return for the tourism service we provide for the Russian tourists and the construction companies that operate in Russia, etc. It's not a favorable balance for Turkey. But one would hope, and he added, President Erdogan, quite fairly, that we hope that our trade volume will reach 100 billion and this will be more favorably, more equitably distributed between Russia and Turkey, one would hope. And this seemed almost possible, not with agricultural products, but with Russia's strained relations with Western powers. All of a sudden, when no one really expected this sort of thing, in fact, I clearly remember what I was doing. I think I was almost going to teach a diplomatic history class, just reading over the news briefly before I was just going to leave the office, and I just saw on the headlines that a Russian jet was downed by Turkey. Obviously, I don't quite remember if I was late for class, because I was staring at the screen for about 5 minutes, trying to understand why, how, probably not true, possible consequences, etc. And I had to cut it short because I had to teach that Bismarck lecture or whatever. But what happened was the more I read about this, the more I tried to understand why this happened and what the possible consequences would be. I have some speculations which we might discuss during the discussion hour, but I'll tell you one thing. The Turkish government's official response to the crisis, which is the only evidence we have at this point on the table. Otherwise, we'll have to wait another 40 years for the archives to be opened, if and when they'll be opened, etc. We'll learn the truth. However, at this point, we only know one thing, that the Russian jet violated Turkish airspace, and that Turks are very sensitive about their sovereignty issue, and you know all that. And therefore it had to be down, and they had been pre-warned, the Russians. Remember, there's an unmanned air vehicle that was down by a Russian drone of sorts, was down by the Turkish forces, which should have been a clear warning sign for them. But you have to also remember exactly that those times when conflicting arguments were coming from the Turkish authorities. They said, we didn't know it was a Russian plane. It could have been a Syrian plane. Then they said, forget it. Even if it were a Syrian plane, a Russian plane, we had every reason, and it was a Russian plane, we had every reason to doubt it. And then these sorts of explanations from the Turkish side. And we also heard President Erdogan unprecedentedly, calmly, kind of not apologizing, but he said, I think he used the words, deeply regretted what happened, which is not very common of his diplomatic wording. It's very uncommon that we hear these things, which probably meant that he was very regretful about what happened. But then again, I can tell you this to end my conversation here. I don't think it was about sovereignty. I don't want to entertain conspiratorial scenarios here, but I don't think it was about sovereignty, because if it were about sovereignty, then we would probably be downing several Greek airplanes over the Aegean, tens of them every week. And it was the Israelis which, of all people, put us to shame by saying that even, I think they used the word even, but not really sure, even we wouldn't have downed it. We would have just escorted it out of our airspace, etc. Turkey is a serious country with serious foreign policy makers. The actual question you should be thinking about is whether this was then premeditated. Now, we're eliminating options here. One would think that maybe it was the pilot's fault. Maybe there was not enough correspondence between the airbase and the headquarters, let alone President Erdogan's red line in the palace. Well, this is also not possible, because this sort of thing, downing the jet, everyone knows, even that pilot knows, that it's going to have consequences. Couldn't have been a warning sign, and they already released the radio transmission. There are several warnings, and they seem pretty determined to shoot down the plane the minute they saw it on the radar approaching Turkish airspace. So I'm not buying that whole argument that this is entirely about sovereignty, because there's so much at stake here. What you're risking to be a principled state. I mean, the United States and the Soviet Union faced one another, two superpowers, so many times over crises like this, the Alaskan airspace, etc. That the U-2 crisis, etc. And I think the U-2 crisis was the only time that the Soviets actually downed an American plane, which is, by the way, a spy aircraft, so they had every reason to do that. Even they tried every other way to prevent something like this from happening. So I think that this is premeditated, which means that they knew the Turkish authorities knew what they were doing. And to go back to what I was saying about Turkey's seriousness, it is a serious country, a big country, with a serious foreign policy mechanism, with great expectations, sometimes quixotic expectations, in the world in terms of foreign policy, power projection, etc. But this is the one thing, and I will clearly say that, to be a little bit polemical before the discussion hour, that they should not have done. The repercussions will be too tough. And Turkey successfully diversified its foreign policy over the past decade, thanks to the current administration, by adding the Russian dimension to their foreign policy. And it was successfully diversified, and in terms of Turkey's less reliance on EU/NATO/ the United States one-sided pro-Western foreign policy. Turkey was pursuing a much more balanced foreign policy in general than, say, the Cold War. There were problems, of course. I don't agree, as a foreign policy analyst or historian, Turkey's policies in the Middle East. I don't agree with most of them. But the Russian thing was a very good thing, and the current administration should get a lot of credit out of this. However, this was premeditated, and this is the one thing that they shouldn't have done. The repercussions will be, the Russians, get this, the Russians are not like the Europeans. They mean it when they threaten, they throw out sanctions. It's not like there's going to be a middle ground, maybe. No, the second package of sanctions, I was reading the Russian newspapers today, probably prepared, and it's going to be released pretty soon. But I will end here and open the floor for discussions. Thank you for listening. Sure.
I have actually two questions. The very first question is about the reliability between Russia and Turkey. You also mentioned the Turkish Stream project, and I think that it's one of the very significant projects in order for Turkey to become an energy hub in the Middle East, and also by connecting Europe to the Caspian area. But the Turkish Stream was not frozen. And beyond this, for example, President Erdogan also went to Turkmenistan in order to
Gazprom said Turkish Stream was not frozen, by the way.
Yeah, actually, that was justified by the governmental, some governmental bodies. And at the same time, President Erdogan went to Turkmenistan, and the president of Turkmenistan said that the Trans-Caspian pipeline project is a promising one for. And we made an agreement with Qatar in order to buy gas in the upcoming future. So all these are these signs of change in the Turkish foreign policy for the near future. So the thing that I'm concerned with, has there been a period of reliability between Russia and Turkey actually since the beginning of the Republic?
Since the beginning of the Republic?
Yeah, have ever these countries count on each other, especially during the Cold War, for example, or just is it happening just for now? Have we ever relied on each other, because we are generally pursuing a pro-Western foreign policy?
Of course, the origins of the Republic, this is what I meant, I didn't have so much time to explain this, but all these evidence that I'm throwing out about the Turkish-Soviet friendship period, many scholars, usually Cold War scholars, regarded this, they wanted to portray this initial formative period of Turkish-Soviet relations as a business partnership. A pragmatic union between two countries that benefit from this thing only temporarily. This is absolutely wrong. It's more than a pragmatic business partnership. They shared a lot more in common. They had differences, obviously. Turkey was not and never been a communist state. While the Bolsheviks were trying to achieve socialism in the country, the Bolshevik promise of socialism, that moment, the Turks were trying to establish a state-sponsored, the creation of a state-sponsored bourgeoisie. However, it was statism, etatism, devletçilik, that they shared a lot in common. So it's not just about diplomacy. There's a lot of mutually lucrative affairs going on between the two. Now, remember, this period is not a very well understood period because it's usually covered with phrases like "Yurtta sulh, cihanda sulh," peace in the world, peace at home, etc., which really means not very much if you don't understand the Russian factor. Let me clarify what I mean here. Turkey, until about 1936, did not pursue a pro-Western policy in terms of its foreign relations. Did pursue a more Soviet-bound diplomacy.
And there are speeches that Mustafa wanted to interview with the journalists.
I mean, if you watch that movie, The Heart of Turkey, Ankara, The Heart of Turkey, you'll hear İnönü in a very funny way, he spoke in a very funny way, giving a lecture, an interview, speech that lasts about 5 minutes, I think, that wants to clarify that Soviet Union is absolutely something else, and it's not just about trade relations or whatever. Turkey received an enormous amount of aid from the Soviet Union during this period, while it did not agree to receive anything from Western powers because we were paying the Ottoman debt thing. Now, this means something. instead of a pragmatic relationship, this was much more than a pragmatic relationship, which unfortunately and the Sanjak of Alexandria. These two had to be revised, and these two couldn't be revised with a Soviet friendship. What the Turkish policymakers struggled between 1936 till about 1939 or 1941 was, how do we try to balance our foreign policy, seek British and French friendships, while not jeopardizing our affairs with the Soviet Union. And as it turns out, it was not possible. The minute Turkey swung from a position of pro-Soviet alliance to a pro-Western alliance, this was to the detriment of Turkey's relations with the Soviet Union. And the Cold War is another story. Obviously, Turks and the Soviets generally were regarded as not getting along too well together, but this is also not entirely true. Turks pursued a blindly pro-Western policy, pro-NATO policy, until about 1960. From the period that begins with 1960 till about the end of the Cold War, Turks pursued a much more balanced foreign policy. It was definitely not as anti-Soviet as it were in the Democrat Party period. Now, this is another forgotten or less emphasized episode, but between the years 1960 and 1990, Turks have launched several infrastructural projects like İskenderun Demir Çelik Fabrikası, Seyrişehir Alüminyum Tesisi, Ali Ağa Petrol Rafinerisi, Bandırma Sülfürik Asit Tesisleri. This is all 1960s and 1970s. All with Soviet aid. Turkey was a NATO ally, a NATO country, NATO member that received, just like in the initial periods of the Republic, sought for, if not a Soviet friendship period, but at least a more balanced relations. Because in 1960, this is how foreign affairs and domestic politics kind of interact one another. In 1960, the coup d'etat of 27 May, the 27th of May, every policymaker in Turkey realized that everyone can go, regardless of their political orientation. You understand? So I'm not going to entertain American conspiracy theories here, that CIA was behind, etc., these things. Because Menderes was planning on going to Moscow in '58 because he couldn't get enough support from the credit extension from the United States, and therefore the US conspired against Menderes, and finally he was gone. No. This is just, these are very popularly entertained scenarios, which are simply not true, or we don't have evidence for it at least. And now, in the 70s, in the 60s, beginning with mid-60s until about 1980s, Turks and the Soviets once again found themselves in a much more balanced state. Now I'll tell you what was pragmatic business partnership. What Turks and Russians were able to build their relationship starting with 1980s, but particularly after the Cold War in 1990s, was a pragmatic business partnership. They had problems, Kurds versus Chechens, right? But they were still, having gone through similar ordeals, similar parallel glasnost, I call them. Turks have opened up to the global markets in the Turgut Özal administration, right? And the same thing happened in Russia with the Gorbachev period and afterwards. Having gone through similar ordeals, Turks and Russians were able to rebuild their relations through business partnerships in the 1990s. And remember, again, an interesting coincidence is when these two countries, both Turkey and Russia, after going through, I guess one would say, severe forms of capitalist reforms, have faced serious economic crises about the same time, 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001. And this period was a very volatile period. Having survived that period, and this coincides with Putin and Erdogan's rise to power in the country, they were able to build something different. And about the natural gas deal, Gazprom might be pressuring, obviously, the Russian government, saying that, well, it's probably not to our benefit. Of course it's not to their benefit. They're getting a lot of money out of this. So by sanctioning Turkey, they would obviously be hurt by it as well. But never think in real political terms through the lenses of neoliberalism. States can act very differently. I mean, this whole McDonaldization theory of international relations or whatever is simply a little silly to me, to be honest. I mean, the countries have power projection dreams and foreign policy agendas that sometimes do not overlap with their economic gains from this partnership. So what I mean to say is that Gazprom might have said that, and some Russian energy minister might say this, etc. It's Putin who called us, and he will as well, very easily. You would, and you're going to come to me and you will say, are you surprised? And you'll say, Hocam, I'm not surprised. You could very easily say, well, you know what? We halt the Turkish Stream project. And now the Russian authorities said about it, what they said about it is that the Turks did not file a launch appeal of sorts, and that they really didn't hear it from the Turkish authorities, etc. This is just going to be on hold. It's not going anywhere. Don't think that the Russians are going to build the Turkish Stream project under these circumstances. On hold means indefinitely. I mean, mutual exchanges between the two foreign ministries are intensifying, exacerbating, rather than de-escalating. So.
I'm going to also listen the Russian side of the story now. I mean, I know you followed Russia very well.
It's very bad. I mean, it's not my answer would be very short. It's very bad.
They're also getting isolated every single day from the world.
Have you seen Kerry?
Yes, yesterday, but I mean,
today he was walking on the streets.
Also, Renzi said that today we are going to revise our sanctions on Russia pretty soon, but
yeah,
you can never trust, especially if you're Russian, to Kerry or Renzi listening to them. But the thing is, yes, they're winning in Syria. They achieve what they want in Ukraine, somewhat, but they're getting isolated every single day. And this is gonna, their economy shrink close to 5% this year. Next year there won't be any growth. So the ruble is what, 69, 67 against dollar. So how long this aggressive defensive expansionism will last?
Defensive expansionism. What is that?
I mean, you know what the Russians think. You know, they have the Ukraine crisis.
Yeah, that's good.
It's their weak belly. So.
That's good. I was joking because that's a part of the my lecture notes. Yeah, defensive expansionism. Yeah. Well, that's true. Russia is not expecting any growth, and Russian ruble plunged several percent. I don't remember the beginning of last year, and it was a period of well, one would say deliberate devaluation of the ruble in the international markets to kind of stop the crisis, to make Russian goods, i.e. natural gas, etc., more appealing,
cheaper,
and cheaper. And this was handled more or less okay, I would say, because Russia is not declaring moratorium anytime soon, like they did at the turn of the last century. That's the late 1990s and early 2000s. They were doing very poorly. Russians are not doing very poorly now. Economic growth is important, I understand, of course. And Russia is acutely aware of its limitations. That China, for instance, is becoming, if not a threat, but a nuisance, an alliance that they have to kind of secure or guarantee. And you can see that at times, so Chinese relations are also tense at times. But the thing is, the Russians are giving a clear message to the world in international politics that they're still a superpower, and given all the economic hardships, etc., that they're still a superpower, and they act. To be perfectly honest, Syria began and become a bone of contention between the two powers, the United States and Russia, a long time ago. But you will recall that it was President Obama who almost launched a war against Assad when Lavrov, very serious man, Mr. Господин Sergei Lavrov, he intervened and he said, well, why don't we just start with the elimination of chemical weapons? Why don't you just start with that? And from that, we arrived at a point when the United States is saying, well, maybe we can tolerate Assad a little bit. To be perfectly honest, the Russians had, I mean, if we're talking foreign policy here, if we're talking economy, that's a different issue, but if you're talking foreign policy, the Russians have pursued an excruciating, a painfully great foreign policy since the breakup of this Syrian ordeal. And much better than the American foreign policy. I'm not even going to comment on the Turkish foreign policy in that either. So I was almost going to write a piece saying that I know President Erdogan sees Russia as a curse in Syria and as a problem, but it should actually have been seen as a blessing. To be perfectly honest, again, you just gave the Kissinger example, or you did, and you confirmed. I'll give you another quote from Kissinger. Frivolity. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Frivolity. Very costly. Very, very costly. The price in frivolity in diplomacy, the price is always going to be paid, sooner or later. Obsession, emotions, these things, they're not very healthy. Personally, I'm having a hard time understanding the anti-Assad obsession. I mean, you will see that great powers may act hypocritically sometimes or put a good face on their blunders, even at the expense of, as we say in Turkish, tükürdüğünü yalamak. Do you understand? In foreign policy, you don't have, you have to think very clearly, with a very clear mindset. Who have you in the country? Let's just say we're thinking about a post-Assad Syria, right? Let's not entertain dreams about the post-Assad period right now. But we know ultimately what we want to get, the post-Assad Syria. Who do you have inside? Who's your friend? The 23 Turkmen chieftains.
İhvan.
Ihvan, but Ihvan is, that's gone. The Free Syrian Army. The United States cut the support, as you all know. 2 months ago, they just announced that they're not going to, what was this train and arm program that Turkey and the US was collaborating, etc. The Peshmerga, all that. Look, every single thing in Syria turned against Turkey's benefit. And, you know, you may want to extend this agony as long as you want, but you're always going to be hurt by this. At one point or another, you have to understand that things, circumstances, are to your disadvantage. And you need to think twice. What do you want there? I mean, you can't fight against the Kurds, Assad, and ISIS all at the same time. I mean, who does that, right? You need to, I mean, who do you have as allies? You're not allies with Russia. Don't think about the American-Russian dispute. There is a clear-cut Vienna, there was, until the downing of the Russian jet, a clear-cut Vienna settlement, Vienna process going on. The Vienna process that Lavrov himself initiated is a rapprochement, or after the Crimean ordeal with the Western powers, was a good thing. The Russians invested a lot in that. Don't forget, the Russians are also angry because they think, if you asked about the Russian response, because they think that the Turks did this deliberately to hurt the Vienna process because they wanted to deter a Russo-Western rapprochement in the region that will tolerate Assad for a little bit. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. So that's my 2 cents. Yep.
Just before finishing your speech, you stated that if Russia threatens somebody or something, she means it.
Mm-hmm.
Which I totally agree with. But to understand their being so serious, should we look at Russian leaders, leading names, or the whole Russian nation? Because as far as I know, and I remember you also said that in the course, the Russian nation is also very patriotic while ourselves. So
it is. They're very patriotic, and in response to both of you, it looks very bad and very disheartening, to be honest. What the Russian media is, the kind of news that's been circulated in the Russian media, you don't want to read about it. I mean, it's not reflected in the Turkish media here. What you see in Turkey, some major websites are saying oh, there are these mutual recriminations about the shooting down on the Soviet jet. No, it's, I don't want to exaggerate, but I would say irreparably, for a very long time, irreparably damaged. And the damage is done, and the course is set in motion. De-escalation is not going to be enough. The escalation of this crisis, apology, yes, of course, I mean, fine, but there needs to be concrete steps taken by the Turkish government to cover this sort of thing up, to be honest, so to mend the affairs. If the Turkish government thinks that, and this is partly a response to you, if the Turkish government thinks that they could supply their natural gas deficiency through other means, they seem, I mean, their grasps at straws seems a bit amateurish, to be honest. Do you understand? Diversification of Turkey's reliance on Russia, or diversification of Turkey's energy supplies, and its over-reliance on Russia had not been done. So you are Qatar. How many years can Qatar supply? Do you understand the amount of natural gas that the combined total of Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan will not be enough to supply to cover up the expense?
80% for Russia.
Not 80%, but yeah, I mean, yeah, of course, the former Soviet Union, FSU, of course. But Russia alone gets about 60%. And so diversifying it is a good idea. So see, I'm not saying like Turks and Russians should be friends, etc. Great, but they should have also diversified Turkey's reliance. One way of approaching this was that they were so reliant on this, is that they thought probably the relations can't be that bad. I mean, regardless. But shooting down a jet is a step too far. And whoever tells you that, no, we are right in shooting down the jet, and because they violated our airspace, and it's unacceptable for any country to violate our airspace. It's the kind of populist, chauvinist, kind of unrealistic stuff that some American news channels, very unpopular ones, also do from time to time does. I mean, the people who actually loved the straining of affairs between Turkey and Russia were those kinds of American people. For instance, the Western people at least. Yeah. So, any other questions?
Okay. Is this downing down or shooting down the jet going to change the policies towards Kurds in Turkey and the Turkmens at the border?
Kurds?
Yeah.
No, I mean, Turks are very adamant about not allowing Kurdish cantons to be established, very unrealistically again, because you see, you can't want everything all at once. You can't have it all. What was this, a Queen song or something, right? You cannot ask for everything and want everything at the same time on your plate without actually doing something. So about the Turkmens, there is a higher reliance on the Turkmens, but we heard news from various websites and news channels that those very Turkmens are led by Turks who were born outside of Syria, sent from God knows where, Elazığ or something, right? And so Turkey's reliance on the Turkmens began already after the Americans called out the train and arm program of the Free Syrian Army. And so yeah, there's going to be more reliance on the Turkmens, but what can you do, to be realistically speaking, with the Turkmens and Laskiye? What can you do? I mean, your power projection dreams are, I mean, it's a moment when I think that we need to admit what's going on in Syria, and we need to think, to be honest, more realistically about the kind of Syria we want after Assad. Because if there is going to be a coalition that will build, international coalition, that will build a new Syria that doesn't include Assad, and if there's going, that will require an intense amount of negotiations with the Russians about the Ba'ath thing. Because to be honest, the Russians don't care about Assad. They just care about that kind of ideology that will host Russia, etc. And there is a strong partnership going on at this moment, and Turkey is not a part of this, any of this, to be honest. Turkish diplomacy have this this problem, I think. In general, it's not just about Syria or Russia, but this whole persistent objector position. Do you understand that we are persistently objecting certain things because, as you know, in international law, if you persistently object something, that becomes the kind of de facto reality for a certain state. That you make it, you forge that thing into being de facto. And so that's the kind of approach Turkey has been taking. About Kurds, Turkey is very, Turkish government affiliated between, well, let me rewind back and tell you that the Kurdish problem is both a domestic and foreign problem for Turkey. And Turks are clearly aware of this, that the Kurdish question, not called as a problem question, doesn't matter, have multiple dimensions, mainly of domestic, with domestic consequences, such as giving collective rights, individual rights, etc. But also it is a foreign problem because I know that every single country that Turkey is not having friendly relations is behind the whole provocation business, which is also true. But right now, in the south of your country, you share a border with not Syria, but with the Kurdish cantons and ISIS and all sorts of factions. So that's not really looking positive there. To say the least, it's not. It doesn't look good. No, London.
Yeah. After the Russian jet issue, do you think the problem could be solved between the governments of Turkey and Russia in a few days, or the reaction, which was the reaction of the Russian mass media and the Russian society, turned this problem into a very big issue? Because I have spent 3 years in Ukraine and I graduated from the school there, and I was following the Ukrainian, Russian, and world media while the Maidan Revolution and Crimean issue were there in 2013-14, and I think the process is similar. In February 2013, Russian mass media started calling Ukrainians as nationalists, banderists, and now they are calling the Turkish nationalists Bozkurtlar. And do you think this is because of the reaction of the Russian mass media and the society turning it into a big issue?
Yeah, the Russian media is overreacting. I actually gave an interview to RT the other day, and I know they're very upset and they're making a huge deal out of this. But you've seen from their perspective, you want to empathize with this. You gave the Crimean example, which is a correct example, which is a good one, because I was very closely following both Russian and the US media from Washington, D.C. at the time when the crisis was unfolding in Crimea. And there was a huge amount of Schadenfreude, is what the term was. It means harm joy. Düşmanına gülmek, komşusuna gülmek falan. Yani birinin, to take joy out of someone's problems from the US media, I can tell you that much. And the Russians, it doesn't necessarily paint them in a very innocent picture, but I can tell you that the origins of the conflict, if you want to get into the Crimean business, is a bit more complicated than what the Western media will tell you. That evil Putin just all of a sudden, overnight, decided to invade, etc. We all know it's not quite like that. What happened obviously transpired, and it's like what they call it now, frozen dispute. However, very few people in the West actually turns that question around and asks themselves, what have we done by provoking Russia, by putting our missile systems in Poland, then here, next day in that country, and the other day in Ukraine? And what have we done to maybe probe the periphery? Now, superpowers have this kind of this attitude of probing the periphery. They just want to get a response, so they gently probe them, right? The Russians are not quite like that. They don't like to be poked. Obviously, don't poke the bear, right? The response was an all-out invasion. And so we can debate it all night long, and that's going to be a completely different situation. But bearing in mind our purposes here, the subject, I can tell you that the Turks have given a much more realistic response. President Erdogan gave a much more balanced reaction to the issue when it comes to the Crimean. And all of a sudden, the issue of the Crimean Tatars became on the table after the downing of the Russian jet. Now I've heard some complaints from Turkish authorities that, well, you know, we were silent in the Crimean business. Now we're not going to be. Which school did you go to in Ukraine?
It was in Kiev, in grammar school 153. School for Russian.
Oh, good. You're Turkish? Azerbaijan. Good.
Yes, first of all, thanks for coming here. And I understand that you know very well inside of Russia. And I'm curious about this something like what are the calm people in Russia, or other people thinks different? There is.
Well,
is there any people like this?
Yeah. I mean, there isn't.
And
sorry.
I can ask other question. You can.
Yeah, well, that's up to the moderator because we're approaching the deadline
Yes.
very soon. We have about 5 minutes, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
The other question is, yes, I like Putin personally.
Personally, you like it there.
But cutting our space area is a hard thing. But do you think that can we think after the shooting down, before the shooting down, twice, what we'll do after this? What?
You mean if we allow them to enter our airspace and probe it? Well, you escort them with your fighter jets. You will escort them out. You just, you know. And this is what generally is called a dogfight. It's okay. I mean, I'm sure both countries are very talented stealth fighters, stealth fighter pilots. Shooting down is, this is why it brings us back to the very first point, one of the first points that I made in this discussion, that I think it was premeditated, except premeditated very badly. They wanted to make a point. Do you think that they didn't expect this kind of response? No, Turks of all people know they're very sensitive, and this is the kind of thing that somebody asked me. The Turks are very, they value sovereignty as much as, and they're very patriotic, like the Russians. They're very much alike in this case. And you remember what happened when the Turkish pilots were downed by Syrian Air Force. It was a big deal, and there was going to be a response, and the response came later. I mean, the best meal served is revenge is a cold one, right? So we haven't seen the entire Russian reaction yet. I'm saying it's very bad in public opinion. We talk about newspapers and stuff. Actual Russian response to this, we're yet to see. We're waiting. There's some tensions in the Aegean and in the Black Sea between the two navies, but we will see. It's not going to be a response that Turkey will enjoy.
Very short question. You said it's kind of premeditated. So I would like to learn everything about who planned it and who premeditated.
I don't know that. No, I don't want to say it. Not with the camera on. Yeah, so, is that fine?
We may have the last question.
Oh, someone has a question?
I have two questions actually. It might take a little bit.
Well, I have to go in like 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay, then maybe.
No. Just ask one of them. Has to.
Okay. I just wanted to ask, what do you think about NATO's position in this? Because just as the article says, they promised to protect Turkey from those airy problems.
Well,
that was the first one.
Oh, you did? Okay. All right. Which one?
On the
Akın Ünvers, the
Akın Ünver.
Clash of Empires
Okay.
on foreign affairs.
Oh, still.
All right, good. Akın is a friend of mine. He's also a Bilkent IR graduate, by the way. I think 2003, right? I know him not just from Bilkent, from the US as well. He's very talented. Well, it has a long answer.
Okay,
question.
then maybe I should come.
No, it's fine. I mean, NATO. NATO would only be too willing to accept Turkey, to embrace Turkey in its soft arms, instead of a Turkey that pursues a diversified policy. That's the bottom line. The NATO members, obviously they were going to say this. What are they going to say? Oh wait, you know what? Russia is right. You should have shut down. I mean, it's very natural what the response was. We're gonna. I mean, they analyze, and you know what? This is the response to your question, my Azerbaijani friend here, who asked about the Russian media. This is the one thing they're doing very badly. The Russians. They're desperately trying to prove that somehow there was no violation of airspace. But this is a very fluid territory, and they're also like the Turks a little bit. Their media is exaggerating things, over-exaggerating, saying that, oh wait, our plane has never entered the Turkish airspace. It was shot down, whatever, and you've seen the map that they drove, produced. That's very, you don't say that. You just say something like this. Hey, it's such a tip of a land. With that speed, with the plane's speed, it might as well be exiting the territory, because we're talking about. All right, so this is the plane, right? It's entering. So we're talking about this. 17 seconds. Is it entering the territory or is it exiting the territory? Sorry. Well, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.